How did I get into local government? Well, I was going to be an apprentice motor mechanic.
Oh, wow.
And my father, who had a garage, suggested I'd be better off if I went to the council and applied for a position as a cost clerk. He didn't think the two of us working together would be a good thing, and on his suggestion then I applied for a position as a cost clerk with the Wondai Shire Council. And that was prior to February 1965, that was. Yeah, so that's how it all started, and I got the position, and the story just goes on from there.
Wow.
Yeah.
So did you, what positions can you recall?
Yeah, well, 65 through till about 68, 69, I was a cost clerk. And then after that, the deputy shire clerk, he moved to Gabarrum, Ray Gesling, and I applied for his position, and internal applications were called, and I got his position as deputy shire clerk. So my boss at that time was the late Colin Morris, and Cole said to me, he said, you know, there's a future here as long as you study and get your passes and that. And he said, you can make something of this. So I followed his instructions, and it was a funny thing. He used to leave a law book in the toilet so I'd make sure if I went in there I could read local government law. But that was Cole. He was a bit of a character. So yeah, and I gained my qualifications in about 73, 74, and Cole retired at 60. He had bad health, and the council called applications for my position, for the position of shire clerk, and I think there was 5 other applicants, and I've got a letter here showing what Cole said about that. And anyway, I was appointed then as the shire clerk.
So what year was that?
That was 1975.
Wow.
I started around...
So only 10 years in local government and you progressed to the CEO, right?
Yeah, on the 11th of January I took over from Cole, 1975.
And can you remember much about the council back in 1975?
Yes, the chairman at that time was the late Les Smith, and Les had been there for a long time. He was a very strict sort of person. He wanted to know everything that was going on. You sort of had to be right on the ball with everything, and if there was any grants coming up, you had to make sure you had applications in to get the grants. So, you know, I suppose he kept me on the straight and narrow, Les, because he wanted to get everything that was going, and that was in particular was during the red schemes, which were in that time. I know some shires hadn't applied because there are political affiliations. And he said to me when I went to a Mount Isa conference, he said, you know, he said, if I was the shire chairman of such and such a shire, I won't mention the shire, and you were the shire clerk and you hadn't applied for those grants, I would have sacked you. And I said, well, you don't have to worry about that. I said, we applied for it and we're getting the grants, and you know, I mean, it was, in those days, it was a matter of really working hard at it. I'd even go to Brisbane and lodge the applications, and I'd wait for an approval before I returned back to Wondai.
Get back with good news.
Yeah, you know, I mean, we did a lot of worthwhile projects out of that, you know, things that you couldn't really afford. We did we did a drainage scheme at Proston, which was a lot of money, but we got that through. We upgraded showgrounds and public structures, you know, and facilities. So it was something, and it provided employment, you know, and it kept employees of ours going too, because work was a bit scarce at that time. Main roads grants or the road funding wasn't as good, and we had to, you know, stand down about 13 people, but we were able to re-employ those people which was good because they were sort of part of the community, and they were close to their long service leave, and you didn't want to see them lose their benefits. So a bit of compassion you got to show, being a local boy, because I was born in Wondai, and that's I was born just after the war when Dad came back from the army. He moved to Wondai. My mother had moved there during the war years to get away from Brisbane. But so I was a Wondai born lad, and I thought, well, I better do something, pay back. Yeah. But yeah, so so it was a learning curve. There was still a lot to learn because I used to rely on other shire clerks for advice in the area, neighbouring shires and Mergen, John Smith, who was here at Caloundra.
John Smith, yes.
John. People like that, you know what I mean, and Frank Narracott at Mergen. Frank was sort of the shire clerk when John was the deputy up there. And you sort of worked with those fellow shire clerks and picked their brains. And it was a lot of networking, really, and it was good because, and I suppose my relationship with the Department of Local Government was a big thing. Being able to contact them and then run something past them and say, well, do you think I'm on the right track? And that would give you assurance then that your sort of decisions you were making were okay. And so that was important to have that relationship with Treasury and local government and with your other fellow shire clerks at that time.
Yes. And did you see a growth in your council, in your staff, in the way you counsel?
It probably reduced back because we relied heavily on main roads works, and when I started as a cost clerk, we had well over 100 employees. We employed a lot of owner truck drivers, things like that, and then it dropped back because the road funding got less. It was always a problem. Road funding was a big thing for the council, and because it produced a lot of revenue from plant hire, and maybe I didn't agree with the council at that time, but they, the funds they made out of plant hire, they probably put back into keeping rates low.
Yes.
And when it should have been put back into renewal funds to replace that equipment. Yeah. But so we steadied the ship at around about 70 odd employees. But what you had to do in those small towns, Wondai, and you had a little place like Proston, Geelong, out Chinchilla Way, and little towns around the area, they were always struggling to survive, and they were like on a life support system, and you had to work hard to generate things, to create employment and do things. And I suppose what I did in those early years was that I started doing residential land development and eventually industrial estates, only because we didn't have any developers in the area to undertake this work. So the council became a land developer. Yeah. And we would acquire, there'd be Crown land within the towns, and we would acquire that land and then get it freehold after we improved it, and we sold it. And we didn't make a lot of money out of it, but what we did, we created employment through house building and getting more people living in the town, and they increased our rating base. Yeah. Not by a lot, but it certainly topped it up, and and that was quite successful, really. And then the industrial estate was the same thing. So you had to wear a lot of hats, and then I suppose the important thing was getting grants to upgrade sewage and water supplies. And I had a bit of a reputation for that. Neighbouring councils would say to me, here comes Keatsy, put your hands in your pocket, But I enjoyed doing that. By chasing down that sort of funding and that improved the infrastructure of the council, you know.
Yes, and I guess it keeps people there too.
It does.
Providing employment
Yeah,
for their
well,
children.
and like, you know, when you can put a water scheme in for under the smaller communities assistance programs we had back in those days, like to a little place called Tingura, which only had probably 30 houses in it, but it was a sort of historic subdivision. But once we got the water in there, and it was at a cost of over 700,000, and you virtually got it fully funded. You were able to put town water on that, extend the water supply from Wandai, and then people built there because it was a beautiful little place looking out over the fields and that. And so, you know, I mean, then the money you got through your rates, then you could put that into reserve funds and build all that up, you know, so you had good renewal funds in it. But yeah, so getting that and like a water treatment plant, you know, I can remember sort of approaching the government, sort of got in touch with me and said, you know, I think the minister was coming up once to do some function, open up extensions to the office, and what could, you know, they do for the council. And I said, oh well, a Tingura water supply would be great. And I get a phone call back a week later saying yes, it's been approved.
Oh.
And I'd already had applications in. I was always proactive in putting applications in ahead of time, and I put one in at the same time for an extension of the Wandai water treatment plant. And after our conversation, I said, oh, what about the Wandai water treatment plant? I said, that was in at the same time, you know. If we're going to take water to Tingura, we need to increase the size of the treatment plant at Wandai. So he said, I'll check on that, and got back to me and a couple of weeks later and said, you know what, he said, they're approving that also. And, you know, I mean, those projects, that was over $1 million, you know, and I think the council input into that was about $90,000, you know, so it was a marvellous thing, you know, for the council and for the community to get that sort of funding.
It's fantastic.
Yeah, so
I don't know if they're that generous these days, are they?
no way, and that's so difficult. You know, I mean, when I look back, there was always some sort of programs out there, you know, rural living infrastructure programs, all those sorts of things, and we took advantage of all that.
Yeah.
You know.
Amazing. So, following on from that, I guess what other changes did you really observe, I guess, in local government, particularly at being a small local government during your time?
I suppose when the Act was altered to include, you know, corporate planning and things like that, that was a big thing for us to digest in those small local governments, because councils weren't that councillors weren't that interested in corporate planning, and so you had to lead it. You had to write the plan. It was really your plan, but you had to get the council to embrace it as their plan, and encourage them to see the benefits and what it can do for budgeting and everything else, and the goals you want to achieve. And that was a big change, corporate change for local government going down that path. And I suppose I got my inspiration through Brisbane City Council by going to local government conferences and seeing what other larger local governments were doing and how they were handling it. And because you had no templates, you had to start from scratch. And I can remember doing the first corporate plan.
Was that the 93 Act?
It would have been, yeah. And that was, I did it over the Easter break. I sat down there and, you know, worked out what the corporate plan would be for the council, for the Wandai Shire. Mm-hmm. So then the big job come along, selling it and getting them to acknowledge that this was now something important that you have to do, you know, and to work with. To drive the local government in our area. But it did happen. You know, they did, eventually they did embrace it, and much to their horror sometimes, you know. But the one thing about it is I tried to say to them, well, you know, it's a living thing. You can change it any time. You know what I mean? It's not stuck there. You know, you can alter it if you want to. And probably bringing the people on board too was a big thing, you know, getting community involved. And that took a little bit too to get feedback from the community, but that was probably really the start of community consultation, you know, and getting that feedback, which I thought was important. You know, you have to have it. And you can sort of help things along by having suggestions, but they might see something different. That should be more of a priority than what you've got in the plan. So, you know, that was how it went, sort of thing. So, yeah. So I suppose from then on it was just a challenge to keep everything going, and then the financial status of local government was a big thing. And you know, we were working very hard to get our debt down and reduce debt and manage that, because you had borrowing plans that had to come in, all those sort of things. They were all new, you know, so it was a matter of embracing all that and trying to get the culture change within the organisation, and the importance of our ratio of debt to rates and all those sorts of things. So that was a big job, even though our debt might have been high. Even closer to amalgamations, that was dropping the debt ratio to rates, and we were getting it because some years we wouldn't borrow any money to try and have a holiday on it and try and level things out a bit. And you know, that was a big thing, because you used to borrow money every year to provide roadworks and sometimes even plant, you know, which, you know, eventually we were able to get away from that and to buy our plant out of revenue. But and then of course changing the council culture on owning plant, like, you know, you can have dozers and all these, you know, things, but the amount of time it works, you know, I mean, if you're not hiring it for any length of time during the year, you shouldn't have it.
Yes.
And I can remember a big blue I had with the mayor and a couple of other councillors when I recommended the council get rid of the D6 days, a Caterpillar days. They said, oh, it's the flagship of the fleet. I said, oh, come off it. I said, if you own that piece of equipment, and I said, you're only getting about, you know, 80 hours hire a year out of it, would you keep it? You know, I said, that's ridiculous. Anyway, the other councillors come on side and we had a win. We put it up for sale because you could hire them in cheaper than what we could hire it out. And then when you had to restart the equipment, the startup would cost you a lot of money because it was sitting idle for so long. So, you know, you had to sort of change all that thinking all along the line, that it wasn't important to have a great big lot of plant there. There was so much plant out there that you could hire privately and you could do it a lot cheaper. Mm-hmm. So, and then, you know, changing the workforce, moving from 6 cubic metre trucks to, you know, 20 cubic metre trucks, you know, so you could haul more at a lower cost and all that sort of thing, you know, and getting economies of scale. So you could compete yourself, because we competed for main roads works, and we had to, you know, be competitive. So that had to happen. So,
How big was your workforce?
It was about 70 all up, yeah. We're only a small council, but
How many councillors?
Councillors, we had 11.
That's quite a lot of councillors. I guess you had quite a large area.
We did have a large area, and then, of course that all changed too when we moved to a whole of Shire voting. Got them away from divisions.
Oh, okay.
We didn't
when
did
you move to that?
Well, that's probably that was in Percy Islov's time. I only had 3 mayors in my time, or 3 chairmen. Percy, like Les Smith, he was there for 48 years as a mayor, and Percy was there for a long time, 30 years probably, and then I had just prior to my retirement, I had David Carter, who was there a couple of years, sort of thing. So I had a continuity there.
Yeah, that's good. And did it work better, do you think, with the...
Yeah, well, I suppose being a local boy and Percy, who was a little bit different bloke to Les, and Percy used to coach me at football, and Percy and I always had a good arrangement. He'd say, look, if you've got to make a decision, go and make it. I'll back you, you know, just do it. If it's good for the community, you go ahead and do it. So we had a real good working relationship that I could, you know, do things, and I'd always run them past him, I would, you know, and tell him that what I'd done, but I had his support all the time, you know, and so I appreciated that, and David, only for a short period of time. I suppose the biggest thing I had there was a fight on my hands with Gordon Nuttall in those days for the hospital at Wondai. So I was holding community meetings and trying to keep my communications open with the health department, that I didn't lose that, because if I lost that, I'd lose the battle. So yeah, it's a matter of communicating, working with people, and so it was, you know, I suppose I went through a lot of different stages, but it was a sort of an exciting time for me, because local government wasn't just roads and
not after
the old rates and rubbish and all this stuff and dogs, but I was more entrepreneurial. I was trying to do things to for the council to make money out of, or you know, or get into enterprises like camping areas at Lake Bunduma.
Yeah, I was looking at some of the projects you've done, and some of it was, I was like, wow.
Yeah.
You know?
So they're everlasting things. They've gone well, you know.
Yeah.
Swimming pool at Proston. I can remember sitting in the Caloundra City Hall here, Civic Hall, when there was a conference on, and we'd had an approach from Proston school kids. They wanted a swimming pool, 25-metre pool. Anyway, it was in Sir Joe's time, I think. They got up and announced these grants.
Was that an LGAQ conference or something like that?
The LGAQ conference was.
Yeah.
Anyway, I turned to Perce and Bob Somerset, the deputy mayor, and I said, Proston Pool. I said, that's the way to go. And they were only offering 50,000 at that time, as that's a maximum grant. So I put that in as the only project we had, was this Proston Pool. So I ended up getting, I think the cost of the pool was about 100,000 or something, and I ended up getting a $75,000 grant for the pool.
Oh, fantastic.
So to pick up the shortfall on that, the community of Proston had a good community out there, and they had a pool committee, and they raised funds to help with offset the cost of the pool by selling tiles. And they put the name of the different people on the tiles that went in the pool. So, yeah, I mean, that all happened, and then the big thing where I played, where the pool was built, constructed, it was on a road reservation, and it then sort of joined onto the school ground. And I thought, well, you know, how can I get a deal here with the education department to come in and be a partner with us, you know, in running the pool, and to help save the running costs. So I thought, what if we make an offer to them that we amalgamate that land with the school land, and then do a deal with the department. So they're off to Brisbane again, a trip to Lynn Powell was the minister. So approached him about it, you know, and said, you know, this would be a good thing if we could do this. And he said to me, he said, oh, you've done this the wrong way. You should have come here first, not after the fact, you know. But I said, I really didn't have much time because, you know, made some weak excuses. But I suppose I sat there and listened to his lecture, and anyway, we ended up with what we wanted. So it was a bit like a yes minister, you know. But again, you know, it was a matter of playing the game a bit, and, you know, it was trying to get things, you know, and it was all legit, you know what I mean? It was for the public's benefit, you know, it wasn't for any personal benefit. And so I enjoyed doing that. It was a real sort of game for me, you know, to front these, because I even went to Canberra and chase money for Aboriginal grants and things like that, because I used to do a lot of work
Yeah.
employing Aboriginals, training Aboriginals. And when I was in Canberra on one trip, I took councillors on a trip down there, and we met with our federal member and the departments, and sort of got things moving with accessing more federal funding for the Aboriginal grants. And on another side, where I was on a public committee, I did that with an aged homes project, which was a community-based thing. And I was secretary of it, and I wasn't having much success with the Social Security Minister on those particular times. And so I then I went to Canberra and approached the minister through my local member. It was Bob Catter Senior. He was our federal minister, and he was at Mount Isa, but we were in his electorate. So about 3 weeks after that, because I took a petition with me with submission and why we should have it and all the rest of it. And about 3 weeks later, we got a letter of approval for our first units. So, and then it just went on from that. Then once we got our foot through the door, then we started reapplying as a public committee and doing that and getting the grants. So
you obviously saw such a change in the Wollongong Shire with all of these new initiatives.
Yeah, well, it was all there for the benefit of the people, you know, and it was about doing things that would create employment, would get more people living in your town, you know. I thought that was important. I wanted to see the town alive, not die, you know. And as I said earlier, a lot of these towns were on a life support system, so you had to do things before that happened. And I suppose Bundoomba was one of my bigger projects, but before I left, I ended up getting a grant through for a new community hall at Proston, which was really badly needed. It also set up the Meals on Wheels with a kitchen within that hall, precinct of that hall. So it benefited a lot of people, you know, and it benefited a lot of groups that lived in Proston and might have played indoor bowls or did something else, you know. But it was really a meeting hub then for that community, which I have a lot of respect for that town. You know, it was a little town of about between 500 and 600 people, but the best group of volunteers I've ever seen in such a small town, you know, doing things for the community. And Wanda was like that too,
Yeah,
you know, I mean, I've got no doubt. Because volunteer organisations, they're important to councils. And, you know, we had 13 real fire brigades. And, you know, we used to have to fund those. We used to fund them and sort of make sure they were well resourced, because, you know, if they're not, they can't do their job. And it's like anything, like arts committees, museum committees, showground committees. You know, I mean, you did all the work for them, put in for grants for the showground capital subsidy works, which was about 40% in those days. I don't know what it is today, but you were there to sort of make sure the community got the most they could out of the system, you know. And it kept those people going, you know. If they weren't resourced, you'd lose them, you know.
The lifeblood of the communities.
Yeah, it is, yeah.
Role models.
Role models?
Role models.
Oh. Well, probably my role model was my late boss, really, Col Morris. I saw what Col had done when he'd come in after the war. I think he was started there in 1948, Col did, and I've got a letter here you should read, that when he took over in 48, he made some notes. I always kept things, I've kept a lot of things because it's pretty special to me, but you know, when Col got there, there was no filing systems or anything in the office, and so he had to, things were in kerosene tin, so he had to get all those things together and get things going. and he sort of inspired me to get on with my studies and to ensure that I'd take over the role as a Shire Clerk in time. And I just looked up to him and the way he operated, and he could manipulate councillors too. Sometimes you've got to be careful you don't get yourself on the wrong side too. But Cole would do all sorts of funny things. But he was a good role model for me. And I suppose there were a lot of other people I could look back to, and even people like Frank Nericott. I'm talking about the older generation, the ones that come before me. But I looked up to those people because they were pretty wise. They had good advice for you, and they kept you on a good straight path. You you didn't dare wander off that path. And I can always remember I criticised a neighbouring shire about their library services or something when I was only a deputy, and I got hauled in pretty quick, over that situation. And it was a good learning curve, It's a bit like playing golf. You don't go throwing your clubs. You just take it, and move on, sort of thing, and you don't think you're better than somebody else, So it's just a combination. But I suppose the best thing, in the South Burnett we had Nanango, Kingaroy, Wandi, Mergen, Kilkeevan and Sherburgh Council, Community Council. And we worked as a local government group, South Burnett Local Government Association.
Yes.
And that was good because we worked together on a lot of joint projects. And I actually thought we were sort of had some winning ways there prior to amalgamation by working cooperatively on things, like our garbage services. I think it was Mergen, Wandi and Kilkeevan went together on that. And that reduced the cost of our services a lot. We also employed a sport and rec officer, which I looked after, and that was contributed to by all the shires for the financial costs of that. Although we got government grants for that, I used to get that through the sport and rec department. And then we had a industrial officer, industry development officer, which we employed on a South Burnett basis. And there were a lot of benefits going out of that, and it was a matter of sharing things, and we were probably working towards a lot of that sharing, and which I thought might have been given a trial, but I retired. I'd made a decision 12 months prior to my retirement date that I was going to retire. I said, well, when I turn 60, I'm going to retire and enjoy life, go and do the things I like doing. And anyway, after that, the amalgamation thing started off when we were having meetings, and we had the sustainability through the LGMA.
I remember that project.
Yeah, I think I've still got had a bag with that on.
Yeah.
Sustainability and all the rest of it. So I thought, well, something might happen there, but then it didn't happen that way. The government made their decision, and I was retired when the announcement was made that councils were going to be amalgamated, and then I was living here, and I just got back from crabbing down at Bells Creek, and there was a phone call. Apparently, Chris, my wife, said, there's been a phone call for you. They want to know whether you'd go to Kilcoy and look after it till the elections.
Oh, it's an interim CEO.
Yeah, interim CEO, because the CEO had walked out. And I said, I'll have to sleep on that. I said, our daughter's having a baby. I said, our first grandchild. And I said, I don't know. I said, I'm liking this retired life. So I said, I'll ring him tomorrow. And I phoned the next day and said, no, I'll stay where I am. But that didn't stop me from getting involved in the community here, because I'd only been here a couple of months, and I got a knock on my door and they needed a secretary for the Caloundra Powerback Club. So I got involved with that. and I was also became a director on the board. It's a company, a public not-for-profit company, and it gave me a challenge because a lot needed to be done with asset management plans and new constitutions. It was all a mess, and it gave me a challenge, something to do. So I got involved in that, and I'm still involved. I'm still secretary, and I'm now the senior vice president of the club. I got the AGM coming up this weekend. I might still have a job, I don't know. But anyway, that gave me a new lease of life there. And I suppose being down the Grant Trail so many times, I noticed down at the boat ramps at Golden Beach, it was a big wide ramp, and I noticed parents were having trouble getting some of the kids with disabilities into boats. And I'd seen these floating pontoons down at Redland Bay, and I thought, that'd be good. They could put one down the middle here, and then you could wheel the kids up in a wheelchair and then put them into the boat, just lift them into the boat. So I got to work and put applications in for a grant for that.
Oh, wow.
And got a grant from the state government for $260,000 to build that. That was about a couple of years after I started. And it's still, if you drive down there, you'll see the benefit of that. It's really great, you know. It's a great launching place for your boats too. You can tie them up, walk along the pontoon to your car, if you're on your own sort of thing, and then park your vehicle and then go back and hop into your boat and off you go. So, yeah, so I've been involved with the club, and it's gone really well, the club too, over the last 7 or 8 years, or longer probably, 13 years. The annual report, you can just see how the growth has been in sales and that. So
it's a great club down there.
yeah, so that's just something I
pretty hard to beat.
Yeah,
Location too.
Yeah, it is a great location. I don't want this reported, but I'm just in the process now, working with the government, trying to get the freehold of the land there,
Awesome.
convert it to the leasehold of freehold. So I'm meeting with Lands in October, and that's one of my biggest goals, is to acquire the freehold of that land for the club in its name, and then it'll have all that equity then. And,
yeah,
you know,
that's amazing.
yeah.
So, looked at a lot of your highlights in your career.
Mm.
Any lowlights that you care to make mention of?
Not really. No, I go through life. I suppose I was only disappointed once with the Grants Commission when they dropped our grant or held it back because of an interpretation of road lengths and all this type of thing, you know. But we did reasonably well out of the Grants Commission, and the big thing was having your submissions in on time. And I found it hard to believe that some councils never had their grant applications in on time, you know, and we're lagging. Like, that was your bread and butter.
Yeah, prioritise.
Yeah, it's got to be number one, you know. So, yeah, I mean, I really didn't have any low spots, you know. I mean,
any challenges they've got here? Low lights and the worst thing about a local government career.
Worst thing about local. Well, I can't probably identify anything there. I've thoroughly enjoyed it.
Yeah.
I still live it. Yeah, I mean, it's my life. It was my life. You know, I mean, I'd go to work early in the morning, and I'd get home fairly late, and then I'd still take work home with me. You know, and it was just something I enjoyed. I'd like the challenge. You know, I mean, there was always something out there. Somebody said, "Do you ever read books?" I said, "No, I'm too busy reading bloody government publications and things that are changes." You know, I said, "They're just flat out." But no, you know, I mean, I've got no regrets. I've thoroughly enjoyed it, every bit of it.
So, what piece of advice would you give a new young CEO or somebody with the ambition or the goal of becoming a CEO? Yeah, I mean, what is one of those things that worked for you that you would think would be a good piece of advice for someone to take on?
Well, you've got to be a team leader, and you've got to bring along everybody with you, because there are other staff members out there with skills that you don't have. And if you can combine all those skills into one sort of team, it's marvellous what you can achieve, you know, as a local government, you know, and as a leader, as a CEO, that's important, and also communicating with your mayor and your councillors, you know, always tell them what's going on, never keep something back, always be open and accountable. You know, you get yourself into trouble if you try to hide things. It only gets worse. If you tell a lie, then and you try to correct that, it'll get worse, you know. So you're better off just saying, I made a mistake. If you make a mistake, just to own up to it.
Yeah.
I've made it. Sorry, I did that. It won't happen again. And people will just say, yeah, I accept that, and you'll move on, you know. But I believe working, you know, bringing everybody on board is a big thing, you know. That's my opinion of it.
And I see you got the CEO Manager of the Year award in 1999.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was a really great thing, you know.
Yeah, and so obviously your staff and your council held you in really high.
Yeah, well, I've got
regard.
letters here from the chairman gave me in those days. I thought I'd give you my CV. You can have
That's
that copy.
fantastic. Yeah,
It's
and
probably up to scratch, but
I'd love a couple of copies of some of
yeah,
your.
well, we can
your-
do some stuff anyway.
Yeah, that would be great.
But yeah, you know, I suppose that was a great highlight. That was a smaller councils, had a fewer than 100 employees. But then I did other things. I was, in the early part of my career, I was selected to go on a Rotary group study tour to Canada, to Michigan with Rotary. I spent about 8 or 9 weeks over in America, and I was able to stay with people in my profession, local government managers, and I got a lot of information from them, you know.
Yeah.
Matter of fact, I called on my notes the other day. This was when Chris Foley was the minister. They were trying to find ways of raising funds for local government, other than by banks. And I can remember when my interview with the Grand Rapids City Council, the mayor over there explained to me how they would sell bonds to, or debentures to their local ratepayers. And the interest they paid was less than what the banks would pay, but the national government would allow the interest that those people earn on those as tax. It wasn't taxable, so they got it tax-free, the interest they earned on that. So it was a win-win. Like people that could afford to lend the council money, they got a return that wasn't taxable, and it provided cheaper infrastructure.
Wow.
And that still happens today
Yeah.
to some degree, because I emailed them and I happened to get onto the city accountant who was just started when I visited there in that particular time. But that was a great experience, you know, learning about how they did things over there, you know, with the unimproved value or the improvements for rating purposes for their land values. And of course, there's a whole different concept there because, you know, I mean, the local government was involved in the policing and the schooling and all those. They had school boards and all those sorts of things. But yeah, it was another highlight of my career was going there, and I still keep all. I've got all my notes on that, so I can go back and I can remember going to Richard DeVos's Amway place, and they had one builder who'd been there for 20 years building. He hadn't moved. It was just such a big, and we had to get taken around in a little bus, you know, to get around this big warehouse. But local government had the same problems, you know. But you know, even with that award, I tied up with the New Forest Council in England, and I went over there and I spent 3 days with them. And one of the conditions of the award at that time was to write a paper on your experiences in local government area, which I did. But they were in the LGMA. I've got copies of them still anyway. But yeah, and that was very interesting. And I found really the problems over there were virtually what we had here.
Yes.
You know, And I got some good ideas for corporate planning through that visit. Although a lot of things today you can just go online and you can just get all that information there. You don't even have to travel anywhere. You can do it in your house if you have to. But I suppose being there and sort of meeting the people and all the rest of it. But I was fortunate at that time my daughter was going with her husband-to-be. They were living in Southampton. So we stayed with them for a few days, and then I took the opportunity to go to Europe and up through England, through Scotland, Wales, and then over to Ireland and to my father's birthplace. Well, not his birthplace, he was born in Australia, but his father and his other brothers, they were born on the Guernsey Isles.
Oh.
I had a dairy farm there, so I went and had a look at that.
Wow.
Yeah, so that was very... well, it was very touching, I thought, to be there and part of that history, you know, to go back and see the old family house.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so that was a great thing. And that, again, you pick up so much information there, you know, from those trips and how they do things. And there's some things in there, well, yeah, I could do that, you know, we could use that.
It's also nice to get the validation that what you're doing is similar to what they're doing.
Yeah, that's right. They had the same problem with skateboards, you know, dogs, all that sorts of things. I said, geez, I just feel like I'm at home still, you know.
I had an exchange through the LGMA as well to Santa Clarita in America, California. Yeah. And I sat in one of their budget meetings just observing, and I thought, wow, I feel like I could be just sitting at home or in any council in Australia. The same things they were debating and arguing over in terms of, you know, priorities and allocations was very much the same as what we do here. So when I came away from that going, oh, we are doing, you know, right. It's replicated around. I mean, obviously they have a whole lot.
Did you find about the when they had their pre-budget meetings, how they had to invite the public there? They couldn't meet secretly on their own, the councillors. Did they have that?
No.
Well, at that time there was a lot of problems when I was in America, and they had to have the public there. They couldn't meet together without a public sort of
this
being.
This one was just the council, so maybe
council,
it was...
Well, these were pre-budget meetings I went to, and things. It was quite funny, really. I thought, you don't trust each other.
Well, what I thought was more alarming was the fact that before you could go into the council meeting, you had to go through their security.
Oh, yeah, right.
They had the scanners.
Well, it wasn't that sort of extent over there in Michigan when I was there.
Yeah.
The big thing was going to local government. I went to a managers' conference over there, and one of the Rotary clubs who owned oil wells, they gave me expenses to go to it. And it was like, they gave me $600, you know, and I said to the CEO I was with, he took me over here, I said, what are we going to do with this money? I said, I better give it back. He said, no, he said, they won't accept it. Let's have a party. So, but, you know, it was good. I had a fantastic time, you know, over there. And just learning about different things. And,
oh, yes, it was.
You know.
It's a great opportunity.
Yeah.
Next question I've got here is, what did you have to change about yourself or your approach along the way? Well,
I've always been my own sort of person, you know. I mean, in Wandai they knew me as Joey Keats, you know, and they still know me as Joey Keats. When I joined the golf and the club over here, I had to put Joe in there because my wife doesn't know Alan. She always refers to Joe.
Okay.
So I was Joey Keats, and I just, that's Joey Keats. You know, I mean, I just do what I have to do, and you know, I mean, I don't know how to put it, but I didn't have to sort of change the way I had to be to do things. So, you know, I mean, I suppose when you meet with ministers of government and things like that, you've got to show respect and all those sort of things. You just put yourself in another gear and you just go along and put your case, and you're respectful to the person. But people in the community knew me as Joe Keats. They could come and talk to me any time. My door was always open. And if some of the people had problems explaining their problems or what they wanted done. I'd even write the letter for them and they'd sign it and I'd take it to the council meeting so then they could get a response and they know things were done. And that sort of approach, you bring the people right on side with you. And when you did have any sort of issues, they weren't big because they knew, you know, they had a council and staff that would work for the community. They weren't anti-community or anything like that. So it was a culture that we sort of developed. It was a hometown sort of homeboy culture, you know, involving everybody, you know, sort of getting the trust of people. That was the big thing. And you never ever want to let anybody down when they've got your trust, you know what I mean? You've got to deliver. So you worked your butt off to make sure you did deliver. So,
That's good. Oh, I've probably covered this one, but what was the worst or most difficult, what was the most difficult part of your role or your roles?
I suppose dealing with industrial matters, with probably retrenchment and sometimes sacking people for offences like stealing and that. Not only ever happened to me. Retrenchment happened once when the main roads funding dropped right back. But what we did, like I said, through the Red Scheme and that, we got those jobs and were able to re-employ them to ensure that they got their long service leave. You know, we told them we couldn't probably put them back on again, but so that was difficult, and I suppose dealing with people, you know, that have done wrong, you know.
Yeah.
So that was the toughest, because you were sort of in a community that you knew everybody, you know what I mean? So they're pretty close to you. And that was a hard thing to do, but something you have to do, whether you like it or not. You know, I mean, I can remember reporting one instance at the CMC, would have been then.
Yep.
It would have been CMC. And I gave them a full report and everything I'd done, and they weren't really interested. So I thought, oh. So
They're still like that.
Huh?
They're still like that.
I can't. Yeah, I mean, here, if I didn't do it, I was in trouble.
That's correct.
Yeah.
We still find today.
Yeah, and I thought, I can't understand this system.
Even now, you report things to them, they send you out the matters assessed report, and it just says, referred to Council D with no advice required back to the CCC, and you think, well, why do I have to
report
notify
this?
you? But anyway, we're not juicy enough,
no,
I suppose.
Well, probably not good enough though. You've got to have a bigger fish.
Yeah, that's right. And it's nice to know that a bit like Wondai, at Sunshine Coast, there's not many of that, there's not a lot of that stuff that we ever have to report. It's all pretty clean, which is nice, but given that, you know, I think people that haven't been in local government tend to think there's a whole lot more stuff going on than what there really is.
But what you find, you're the last one to find out. Other people know.
Yeah, that's
and
right.
And then all of a sudden they've had a couple of beers and then the story comes out.
And sometimes it's difficult too in local government to really be able to, the investigative powers in local government is non-existent, so you can only use certain tools to try and substantiate or non-substantiate a matter.
I don't think I was a big fan of enterprise bargaining either.
Oh no,
that's something I was never a big fan of. I know my main concern was sometimes with awards and that, is that you couldn't reward other employees if they were better than the other. I always remember a factory in the United States that said, if I produce, will you pay? And the factory owner said, yes, if you produce, I'll make extra payments. But, you know, we had certain employees that were well above others and looked after their machinery, but you couldn't reward them, give an over-award payment. You know, and I found that a bit difficult. I was a bit more, I suppose, with my dad running a business, you know, and he had mechanics and that. you could give them bonuses, you know, depending on their work performance, but, you know, that sort of wasn't allowed, and so you'd have all troubles if you try to implement those sort of things. But I suppose in private business you can do anything you like. You know what I mean?
It's a lot easier too to go down that path
Yeah.
of disciplinary in a private enterprise too. So, best thing about having a local government career?
Well, I suppose it was the security of employment for me. I only ever applied for one other job outside of Wandle, and that was the Shire Clerk at Noosa.
Oh, really?
When Dan somebody was there. But I knew then, because they had internal people working there, they would be given preference, you know. I still put an application in. I thought, well, I want to learn a bit more, you know, I want to sort of go to a big area. And my chairman at the time, Les Smith, he said, what do you want to go there for? You okay here? Stay here, you know. He wouldn't even give me a reference. And I had to get a reference from Bill Roberts over at Mergen Council.
That would have been around before the Rob Noble days.
Oh yeah. I think I might even have letters when I applied for that here somewhere. But so anyway, I end up. I didn't get the position, so I was still at Bondi anyway. But when your own chairman wouldn't give you a reference, I had to go to the neighbour. But,
That's funny.
okay.
Mr. Keats, now what advice would you give to a new local government or prospective CEO?
My first advice would be that he should be a team leader. He should look to his staff and involve them in all decision making, because those staff members might have skills that he mightn't have, or she mightn't have, and they can be used to to benefit the whole organisation, you know, as a team.
And what do you like to do now? What do you enjoy doing with your time now?
Well,
Crabbing and fishing and...
Yeah, I like go fishing. I play golf. I'm a golfaholic. But I suppose my community work is mainly with the Powerback Club, because it's a not-for-profit club, and that keeps me involved. It's a big business, of course, and ensuring that they're meeting all the requirements there with ATSIC and that, because you've got to put all those annual returns in. So I'm still putting in annual returns and annual reports and that. So yeah.
Well, it's a great skill set that you bring to the Powerboat Club. You know, all those years of working in local government and understanding legislation and those sorts of things. It must be such a great thing for, you know, a community group to have that set of skills, because they actually have quite a lot to do to comply and you know, knowledge of budgets, knowledge of all of those things.
Well, it's just making sure that the directors are, you know, don't get into trouble, you know, through decisions they make and things like that, you know.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a big business, and it's got to be run properly, and you know, it's a bit like purchasing, you know, if you've got an interest, declaring your interest, you know, I mean, I'll make sure they declare their interest. If they have an interest in a matter, it goes on the minutes, so then there's no comeback. Keep it clean. Yeah, that's all you got to do, you know, protect your butt.
And what year did you retire?
2007.
2007.
Yeah.
And date of birth?
22nd of November 1946.
And do you remember when you joined the IMM?
I joined as a as what do they call it, a junior associate student I joined as, and that probably would have been 70. Trying to think now. That would have been in the early 70s. would have been the early 70s, because I went to a couple of conferences they held at the University of Queensland
Oh, wow.
when Macaulay was the town clerk of Brisbane.
Yeah.
And I could remember them all getting into playing up with them.
My very first IMME was in 99, I think, at Longreach.
Longreach,
Yeah.
99.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it was 1999.
That was-
Longreach.
that
When
was
you won
it.
that.
Yeah. That was when my mate, the minister, what was his name? Anyway, he was the one that presented me with the award.
And that was when they had the dinner underneath the stars at the Stockman's Hall of Fame.
Fine,
Yeah.
So,
I was sponsored by, was it Rob Ferguson and
oh yeah.
I was one of the. Remember they used to sponsor a student once a year to go to the conference.
Oh yeah, right,
and
okay.
Gary Storch at the time had recommended me to the South East Queensland branch as someone to be, because I was studying, and Gary Storch said to me, "You should do this, Kim. You would really enjoy that, and I can see that you've got some potential and interest in local government." And that was my introduction, and from then yes, this is great. There's an actual career in local government. I'm really keen now, and I guess I was all young and all just so amazed by all these big CEOs and these important people, and what I could learn from them. So I think the local government industry is amazing, and to have that camaraderie that I think particularly